My name is Claire Morgan. 1 week before my wedding, my parents chose my sister's grandkids over me. The call came while I was standing in a bridal boutique during my final dress fitting. My mother sounded nervous. "Claire, your father and I need to talk." Immediately, I knew it involved my older sister, Emma. Dad got on the phone. "Caleb has a baseball tournament in Arizona next weekend." I waited. Then I reminded him. "Dad, next weekend is my wedding." "I know." Those 2 words told me everything. Mom quickly explained that Emma couldn't handle the trip alone with both kids. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. "You already bought tickets, didn't you?" The silence answered for them. The decision had already been made. My parents were going to Arizona instead of attending my wedding. Then Dad said something that hurt more than anything else. "Family comes first." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I am family. Neither of them responded. Mom sighed. "Claire, you're strong. You'll understand." Strong, the word people use when they're asking you to accept disappointment. For years, I'd helped everyone. Dad's business, Mom's appointments, Emma's emergencies. Whenever somebody needed help, I was the person they called. Yet somehow, I wasn't important enough for my own parents to attend my wedding. For the first time in my life, I didn't try to make them feel better. "If you miss my wedding, that's your choice," I said quietly. "But don't ask me to pretend it doesn't hurt." The call ended shortly after. When I got home, Ethan immediately knew something was wrong. "My parents aren't coming to the wedding," I told him. The room went silent. What I didn't know yet was that the wedding wasn't going to be the biggest consequence of their decision. The biggest consequence was a set of keys I'd been carrying for years. And very soon, I was going to hand them back. Part 2. Emma had always been the center of attention. Whenever she had a problem, the entire family moved to solve it. Meanwhile, I became the dependable daughter, the one who didn't complain, the one who handled things. Over time, my family stopped seeing my reliability as a gift and started treating it as an expectation. 5 years earlier, after Dad's health scare, I started helping at the hardware store. What began as a few small tasks slowly became a major responsibility. Payroll, inventory, supplier accounts, employee schedules, security systems, problems nobody noticed because I handled them before they became emergencies. At the same time, Emma's divorce created a steady stream of crises: money problems, childcare problems, life problems. And I helped whenever I could, not because anyone forced me, because I loved my family. A few days after the phone call, I stopped by Dad's office. I asked him one final time, "Are you really going to miss my wedding?" He didn't look at me. "Emma needs us." That was his answer. The same answer as always. Emma needed something. Therefore, everyone else came second. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and started writing down everything I handled. For the store, for my parents, for the family. The list became surprisingly long. Looking at it, I realized something. For years, I'd been carrying responsibilities that were never truly mine. One task at a time, one favor at a time, one emergency at a time, until eventually I became responsible for things nobody even realized I was managing. For the first time, I asked myself a question. What would happen if I stopped? The answer was coming sooner than anyone expected. Part 3. Over the next few days, relatives started calling. Every conversation sounded the same. Try to understand. Your parents are in a difficult position. Emma needs support. Not one person asked how I felt. Not one person asked why a baseball tournament mattered more than my wedding. That silence told me everything. Then Emma called. "I heard you're upset." Upset. As if I was annoyed instead of heartbroken. "You really don't get it, do you?" I asked. What am I supposed to get? Mom and Dad are missing my wedding. They're supporting family. The words hit harder than she realized, because apparently I wasn't included in that definition. Then she said the thing I'd heard my whole life. You've always been independent. There it was again, the excuse, the reason everyone felt comfortable asking more from me than from anyone else. I was strong, I was dependable, I could handle it, which somehow meant I deserved less support, less consideration, less attention. After the call ended, I sat alone for a long time. Then I opened a notebook and began writing. Every responsibility connected to the hardware store, every account, every password, every supplier, every monthly task. The list grew quickly. Halfway through, I stopped and stared at the page. Nobody hands you a mountain all at once. They hand you pebbles, one responsibility at a time, until one day you realize you're carrying the entire thing. That night, I finally made a decision, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of clarity. For years, I'd been carrying responsibilities that belonged to other people, and very soon, I was going to put them down. 2 days before the wedding, I took a day off work, not for last-minute wedding preparations, not for shopping, not for relaxation. I spent the entire day sitting at my kitchen table with a laptop, a stack of folders, and a notebook. For years, I had carried responsibilities that belonged to other people. Now I was organizing them. Every supplier contact, every payroll instruction, every inventory schedule, every vendor account, every password, every security code, every monthly task that quietly kept Dad's hardware store running. By noon, my dining table looked like an office. By evening, everything was finished. Every responsibility was documented. Every process was explained. Everything was neatly organized inside a large binder. Simple, clear, easy to follow. Exactly the way I would prepare instructions for someone who needed to manage things on their own. When I finally leaned back in my chair, my eyes landed on the key rack near the back door. The store keys hung there, the office keys, the warehouse keys, the alarm keys. For years they had gone everywhere with me, vacations, family dinners, date nights, even holidays. If something happened at the store, people called me, not Dad, me. I walked over and took the key ring off the hook. The metal felt surprisingly heavy in my hand. Not physically, emotionally. Those keys represented years of responsibility, years of being the dependable daughter, years of saying yes. I slipped them into my purse. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Mom was helping my niece pack a suitcase for Arizona. The sight hit me harder than I expected. Everything looked normal. Nobody looked conflicted. Nobody looked guilty. Just excited for their trip. A trip scheduled during my wedding weekend. Dad smiled when he saw me. "Morning, sweetheart." I walked into the kitchen and placed the binder on the table. Then I set the keys beside it. The metallic sound immediately caught everyone's attention. Dad frowned. "What's this?" I sat down across from him. "The store." His confusion deepened. "What do you mean?" I pushed the binder toward him. "Everything you need." He opened it. His eyes moved from page to page. Supplier information, payroll procedures, inventory schedules, monthly tasks, emergency contacts. The more he flipped through it, the quieter he became. Mom stopped folding clothes. The room felt completely still. Finally, Dad looked up. "Claire." I kept my voice calm, calmer than I felt. "You're going to Arizona." His expression tightened immediately. "We already talked about that." "I know." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then I pushed the keyring toward him. "I'm stepping away from the business." The words landed like a weight. Dad stared at me, then at the keys, then back at the binder. "What does that mean?" It means the store is yours again." His face went pale, because for the first time he was seeing the full picture, not just the wedding, everything, the responsibilities, the systems, the work, the invisible labor that had quietly held everything together. Mom finally spoke. "Claire, don't do this because you're upset." I looked at her, then I shook my head. "No, I'm doing it because I'm tired." That answer silenced the room, because it was true. I wasn't acting out of anger. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was exhausted. Exhausted from carrying things that didn't belong to me. Exhausted from being everyone's backup plan. Exhausted from always being strong. Dad slowly closed the binder. His hands were shaking. "When did you start handling all this?" I almost laughed, because that was the question. Not when I created the binder. When had I started carrying everything? Years ago. One task at a time. One problem at a time. One emergency at a time. Until suddenly I was carrying half his life without either of us noticing. I stood up. Dad looked completely lost. For the first time in years, he looked like a man realizing how much he depended on someone else. "Claire." I stopped at the doorway. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, then at the binder, then at the keys. And finally, I gave him the most honest answer I had. "Now you find out how much I was doing." Nobody followed me outside. Nobody tried to stop me. As I got into my car, I glanced back through the kitchen window. Dad was still sitting at the table, the binder open, the keys in front of him, staring at both. And for the first time in years, the weight wasn't mine anymore. 2 days later, I was getting married, and my parents were about to learn that some choices cost far more than they expect. The morning of my wedding arrived cold and clear. I woke up before my alarm and lay staring at the ceiling. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. Then I remembered my wedding, my parents, Arizona, the empty seats waiting in the front row. A strange sadness settled over me, not sharp like before, just heavy, the kind of sadness that comes when you finally accepted something you never wanted to be true. By mid-morning, the house was full of activity. My bridesmaids arrived, hair appointments started, makeup bags covered every available surface, music played softly in the background. Everyone was trying their best to keep the mood light, and slowly, it worked. For the first time in days, I laughed, a real laugh, not the fake kind I'd been giving people all week. As I sat in front of the mirror getting ready, my phone buzzed several times. Messages from relatives, a few congratulations, a few awkward apologies, a few excuses pretending not to be excuses. I ignored most of them. Today wasn't about explaining my feelings. Today was about getting married. Around 2 o'clock, we arrived at the venue. The hall looked beautiful. White flowers lined the aisle. Soft lights hung from the ceiling. Everything Ethan and I had spent months planning was finally real. For a moment, I just stood there taking it all in. Then my eyes found the front row. 2 seats, reserved, empty. The sight hit me harder than I expected. No matter how much I prepared myself, some part of me had still hoped. Maybe they'd change their minds. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe I'd walk into the ceremony and see them sitting there. But the chairs remained empty, and deep down, I knew they would stay that way. About 30 minutes before the ceremony, I slipped into a small room behind the main hall. I needed a moment alone, a moment to breathe, a moment to let go of the disappointment before I walked down the aisle. That's when my phone rang. Dad. I stared at the screen. For several seconds, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Hello?" At first, there was only silence. Then Dad spoke. His voice sounded different, tired, heavy, almost broken. "Claire." I didn't say anything. I read everything. I immediately knew what he meant. the binder, the lists, the responsibilities, the years of invisible work. His breathing shook slightly. I had no idea. I closed my eyes. For the first time since all this started, I believed him. Because people get used to being carried. Eventually they stop noticing who's doing the carrying. I should be there, he said quietly. The words landed harder than I expected, because they were true, painfully true. You should, I answered. Silence filled the space between us. Then Dad said something I never expected to hear. I failed you. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Not because everything was fixed. Nothing was fixed. He was still in Arizona. The wedding was still starting without him. But for the first time, he wasn't making excuses. For the first time, he wasn't talking about Emma, or Caleb, or family obligations. He was talking about me. And maybe that was what I'd wanted all along. Not agreement, not praise, just acknowledgement. A few seconds later, Dad cleared his throat. I love you, sweetheart. My voice almost broke. I love you too. The call ended, and strangely, I felt lighter. Not because the hurt was gone, because the truth had finally been spoken. A knock came at the door. Dana peeked inside. It's time. I stood, smoothed my dress, took one deep breath, then followed her toward the ceremony doors. When they opened, the room was full. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, people who had shown up because they wanted to be there, people who cared, people who chose me. And standing at the end of the aisle was Ethan, smiling, waiting, looking at me like I was the most important person in the world. In that moment, I stopped thinking about the empty chairs. I stopped thinking about Arizona. I stopped thinking about disappointment. Because suddenly I understood something. Love isn't measured by who needs you. It's measured by who shows up. And as I took my first step down that aisle, surrounded by people who had chosen to be there, I realized I wasn't walking toward a loss. I was walking toward a future. And for the first time all week, I didn't look back. The wedding was beautiful, not because everything went perfectly, because I stopped focusing on what was missing. For the first time in a long time, I focused on what was actually there. Ethan, my friends, the people who had shown up, the people who chose me without being asked. By the end of the night, the empty seats in the front row didn't hurt as much as they had that morning. They still hurt, but they no longer defined the day. The honeymoon lasted a week, just enough time to breathe, just enough time to remember what life felt like when every problem wasn't mine to solve. When Ethan and I returned home, reality came back quickly. 3 days later, Dad called. I didn't answer. Then he called again, and again. Eventually, he left a voicemail. Claire, please call me. I waited 2 more days before returning the call. When he answered, he sounded relieved. Thank God. I smiled despite myself. What's wrong? He laughed. Not a happy laugh, a tired one. Everything. Over the next 10 minutes, I listened. The inventory system was behind. A supplier order had been missed. Payroll was running late. 2 employees were arguing. The insurance renewal paperwork had almost expired. Problem after problem. The kind of problems I used to solve automatically, without recognition, without discussion, without anyone even noticing. Dad sighed heavily. I don't know how you kept track of all this. Neither did I anymore, because when you're carrying weight a little at a time, you stop noticing how heavy it is, until you finally put it down. A week later, Dad showed up at my house. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent weeks discovering truths he didn't want to face. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd built the binder. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Dad reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the table, the master key to the hardware store. I looked down at it. Neither of us touched it. "I owe you an apology," he said. I stayed quiet. For once, I wanted him to say everything, not half of it, all of it. Dad looked down at his hands. "When your mother and I decided to go to Arizona, I kept telling myself it was just one day." His voice cracked. "One wedding day." He laughed bitterly. "The problem is that it wasn't one day." I felt my chest tighten, because finally, he understood. "It was years," he continued quietly. "Years of you helping us. Years of you showing up. Years of you carrying things I should have been carrying." Tears filled his eyes. I got used to it. The honesty in those words hit harder than any apology could, because that was the truth. Not just for Dad, for everyone. They got used to me, used to my help, used to my reliability, used to my sacrifices, until eventually they stopped seeing them. Dad looked up. "I thought you'd always be there." I nodded slowly. "I know." Another silence settled between us. Then he said the one thing I'd waited years to hear. "I was wrong." Not about Arizona, not about the wedding, about me, about taking me for granted, about assuming I would always understand, always forgive, always carry the weight. He wiped his eyes, then smiled sadly. "You know the worst part?" "What?" "I missed your wedding." His voice nearly broke. "And nothing is ever going to give that back." The room went quiet, because we both knew he was right. There would never be another wedding. There would never be another walk down that aisle. No second chance, no do-over, just a memory, and a regret he would have to live with. Eventually, Dad pushed the store key toward me. "Take it." I looked at the key, then I pushed it back. "No." His eyebrows lifted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled. A small smile. A peaceful one. "That's your key, Dad." Something changed in his face. Not disappointment. Understanding. Finally, understanding. For years I thought being needed meant being loved. I was wrong. Being needed and being loved are not the same thing. One creates responsibility, the other creates connection, and I was finally learning the difference. Dad stood a few minutes later. Before leaving, he hugged me, longer than usual, tighter than usual. Then he quietly said something he should have said years ago. "Thank you." Not for payroll, not for inventory, not for the business, for everything. After he left, I stood at the window and watched him drive away. Then I looked down at my wedding ring, at the life Ethan and I were building together, at the peace inside my own home. And I realized something. My parents choosing my sister's grandkids over my wedding wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment my story finally changed, because the day I handed Dad those keys wasn't the day I lost something. It was the day I stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. And that freedom was worth more than any apology I would ever receive.